They called it a defection. 3 generals gone, just like that. Official cables said they slipped east. Truth is, they never crossed the wall. I know because I was the last one to see them alive. Berlin, 87 cold streets, warm lies. We thought the threat wore a Soviet uniform. It didn't. The night they vanished, I walked into a sealed basement under our embassy. What I heard in that room, it never made the reports. Orders weren't coming from Moscow. They were written in English, signed by hands we trusted. Before this disappears like they did, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're ready for more than headlines. And tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where these ghosts travel. I didn't plan to talk about this, not after all these years. But the older you get, the lighter secrets feel until you open the box and realize they've been gaining weight. That winter in Berlin, the news broke quietly. 3 U.S. generals gone, no trace. The official line? Desertion. Papers loved the drama of betrayal. The agency? They didn't love anything about it. I was already counting my last months in the field, thinking I'd retire with my bones intact. When the call came, I almost let it ring. A voice I knew well said, "You're needed at the embassy. Tonight." No reason given, no questions allowed. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the tone. Flat, clipped, like someone trying not to choke on words. The embassy looked asleep when I arrived. No lights on the main floors. Just a single guard with a stare that lasted too long. He scanned my badge twice, then passed me without a word. Down the stairs, the air changed cold, metallic, like the basement had been sealed for months. The room was small, no windows, walls lined with filing cabinets older than me. At the center, a table with 3 empty chairs and a single folder. Inside, 3 names I knew well. Men with stars on their shoulders. Men who'd briefed presidents. The folder didn't say missing. It said silent. And that word carried more weight than any bullet I ever loaded. I waited for an explanation. None came. Just another folder slid across the table, marked with a single phrase, Operation Glass Veil. I'd never heard of it. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the signature at the bottom. Someone high enough to rewrite the map of Europe with a phone call. That should have been the end of it. But then the elevator door opened. The elevator opened without a sound, and 3 men stepped out, each carrying the kind of face that forgets how to smile. I recognized 2 Langley brass with enough clearance to make senators sweat. The third wore no insignia, no rank. He moved like someone who didn't need introductions. No greetings. No handshakes, just orders. Phones on the table. 1. Sighed. We obeyed. They slid each device into a black pouch, zipped it shut, and stacked them like bricks. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going in the record. They led me deeper, through a steel door that needed 2 keys and a code I'd never seen. The room beyond was wrong, too clean, too quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering like they were nervous too. The air smelled of fresh paint and metal filings. Someone had scrubbed this place into secrecy. On the table, blueprints. Not of buildings, not of walls. These were schematics for something I'd only heard whispered in half-jokes, missiles that could blind Soviet radar, slip through gaps we weren't even supposed to know existed. They called it Project Glass Veil, untraceable deterrence. One of them said, like that phrase meant anything outside a think tank. I asked the wrong question. If this works, why the urgency? The nameless man looked at me the way surgeons look at tumors. Because urgency isn't the problem. Loyalty is. Then the door clicked behind us. Not gently like a lock deciding sides. I noticed then, no papers on the shelves, no clocks. On the walls, no cameras in sight. A room built to erase itself. They started talking in fragments, timelines, deployment zones, names I wasn't cleared to know. But the part that stuck, the part that kept me awake for years, was this. 3. Generals didn't just disappear. They were present tense liabilities. And liability had a protocol. We wrapped that night in silence, the kind that weighs on your lungs. I walked out with one question pounding louder than the echo of my boots. Who exactly were we protecting? Our country, or the men writing its obituary in invisible ink? And that's when I started to suspect the truth, not that they were lying, but that I'd helped them do it. Walking back through the embassy corridors that night, I kept telling myself, it was just another operation. Berlin was built on paranoia. You learn to breathe it like air. But something about that room stayed under my skin. No files, no clocks, no sound but our own voices. Like the walls were waiting to forget us. 2 days later, I got an envelope, marked eyes only. Inside, a briefing so sterile it smelled of bleach. Operational containment. That's all it said about the generals. Containment, not recovery. It didn't take a genius to read between the bureaucratic lines. We weren't bringing them home. We were burying the idea of them ever existing. I'd been in the game long enough to know when the floor shifts under you. Orders started changing in whispers. Clearance levels shuffled like a bad deck. People I trusted stopped making eye contact. When I asked questions, answers came packaged as jokes. Don't lose sleep over ghosts. But ghosts don't carry stars on their shoulders. I wanted to believe we were still on the right side of the map, that this was about national security, not something darker. But then I saw the list handwritten, no header, no classification stamp. 3 names crossed, out in black ink. Beside them, a 4th, mine circled in red. No explanation, no context, just a circle, like a noose tightening on paper. I burned that slip in an ashtray, watched it curl into black flakes. But the image stayed. I started counting my exit doors. Windows, flight paths. Every habit turned survival instinct. And for the first time since I joined, I wondered if carrying a badge meant carrying a target. That should have been the end of it. But then the knock came at midnight. The knock was soft 3 taps, too measured to be random. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Just a slip of paper on the floor. Stay inside tonight. No signature, no mark. Nothing but the weight of certainty pressing down on my chest. I killed the lights and sat by the window, curtains barely open. That's when I saw them 2 figures across the street, half hidden in the fog rolling off the spree. Not KGB. Wrong posture, wrong suits. These were ours, or close enough to pass. They weren't watching the building. They were watching me. Ours. Crawled by. Every car engine sounded like an ending. When I finally moved, it was to check the street from another angle. That's when I caught the second layer of this little theater. Farther down, near the corner, another pair of shadows. And beyond them, a third. They weren't working together. They were circling each other, leashes invisible but tight. Berlin at night was never empty, but this felt orchestrated, like a play where nobody knew the full script. Except someone did, and they were pulling strings from a room I'd never see. I tried tracing them the next day, walking through Kreuzberg with my collar up. Just another tired American buying bread. They were better than I expected. One ducked into a tobacco shop, came out in a different coat. Another switched cars. Like magic, these weren't freelancers. They had training. And if they were tailing our generals, it wasn't Moscow giving the orders. I reported what I saw. The reply came hours later. A single line on an encrypted channel, maintain position. Do not interfere. No signature, no clearance code. Which told me 2 things. They knew where I was, and they didn't care what. I thought, That's when I realized the truth that tasted like rust. The enemy we feared was outside the wall. The enemy we obeyed was inside it. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 nights later, when the generals walked into the dark for the last time. They picked the kind of night Berlin specializes in: wet streets, fog curling like smoke, the kind of cold that makes silence louder. The message came on a dead drop I almost didn't check. Movement confirmed, 2,200. Stand by. No sender, no stamp. Just enough to pull me back into the dark. I positioned myself 2 blocks from the meeting point, a gutted warehouse near the old rail yard. From the outside, it looked abandoned: graffiti, rusted shutters, windows blacked out with grime. But the smell of fresh oil in the alley told another story. Someone had been here, and recently. At 21:45, the first general arrived. Heavy coat, collar turned up, briefcase in hand. He didn't look scared. He looked resigned, like a man who'd read the last page of his life and decided to walk toward it anyway. 10 minutes later, the second appeared, then the third. Same uniform of anonymity, same unspoken tension. I stayed in the shadows, eyes on the entrance. No bodyguards, no backup. Just 3 men who had commanded divisions, now moving like fugitives on their own soil. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Whatever this was, it wasn't sanctioned. They stepped inside. I followed the faint echo of boots through the cracked door, keeping distance. The air inside was different: warm, almost humid. A generator hummed somewhere, feeding a single bulb that swung like a pendulum above a table. On it lay folders, maps, a small transmitter blinking red. The generals spoke in clipped tones, words shaved of emotion. I caught fragments: deployment grid, breach window, containment. Then came a phrase that froze me. Before Langley decides the timeline. Langley, not Moscow. And the tone wasn't fear, it was defiance. They weren't running to the Soviets. They were running from us. The meeting lasted 13 minutes. At 22:12, they broke apart. No handshakes, no goodbyes. Just 3 men walking into separate exits, like ghosts rehearsing a vanishing act. The plan was obvious: split up, reduce exposure. I adjusted my position, ready to shadow at least one. But then the signal hit my ear, a faint buzz on a frequency I hadn't used in years. Stand down. 2 words, flat, mechanical. My stomach nodded. The channel wasn't agency standard. It was internal counterintel, which meant they weren't just watching the generals. They were watching me. I ignored it. Habit or instinct? I don't know. I trailed the first general as far as the tram lines. He moved steady, never looking back. Then a black sedan rolled up, no headlights, no plates. Door opened. He got in without hesitation. The car slid away like a shadow into thicker shadows. By the time I turned, the other 2 were gone. No footsteps, no engines, nothing but the echo of my own breath fogging in the dark. I stood there, feeling the city swallow them whole and for the first time, I understood what disappeared really meant. I made the report anyway, back at Safe House Alpha, coded, precise, by the book. The response came 4 hours later, acknowledged. Nothing else. No questions, no follow-up. Just that sterile word hanging like a noose. Sleep didn't come that night. Neither did answers. And when dawn bled gray over Berlin, I checked. The drops again. Empty except for one envelope wedged under the sill like an afterthought. Inside, a single line typed on paper, yellowed at the edges. Stop looking, or you'll be the 4th. Beneath it, a string of numbers only someone from our side could have written. I burned the message in the sink, watched it curl into nothing. But the words stayed, echoing against every bone in my body. That was the last time I believed in accidents, and the first time I realized survival wasn't about what you knew. It was about what you could pretend to forget. But pretending has a half-life. And mine was running out. When I sent the report, I didn't expect a medal. I expected questions, maybe even a reprimand for stepping outside my lane. What I got was worse. Nothing. Hours stretched into a day, then two. No acknowledgement. No encrypted follow-up. Just silence, the kind that hums like static in your bones. By day 3, I started making calls through channels I trusted or thought I did. Old colleagues, men who owed me favors. Each line ended the same. Clipped voices, sudden disconnections. One contact in London said 6 words before hanging up. Drop it. They're already writing history. That's when I checked the roster. The generals' names were gone. Not flagged, not reassigned, gone. As if someone had reached into the archives and plucked them out like weeds. I cross-checked internal memos, old logs, even payroll traces. Every lead led to a blank screen. And the deeper I dug, the more I felt eyes on me. The first sign came in the cafeteria. 2 men in suits, not ours, not locals sitting too still, their trays untouched. I'd seen that posture before, surveillance pretending to be invisible. When I left, they left. When I stopped, they paused just long enough to make me doubt whether I imagined it. That night, I swept my safe house for bugs. Found one in the NGU vent, another under the desk. Both American tech, newer than anything we'd seen deployed in the field. Whoever planted them wasn't Russian. They were closer than that, close enough to use our own toys. I tried one last route, a telex to Langley, routed through a dead channel. The reply came faster than I expected. 2 words burned into the paper like a threat. Case closed. No signature, no code. Just that finality, cold and clean, like a door slamming shut on everything I thought I knew. I should have walked away. I almost did, until the envelope appeared. Slipped under my door sometime between midnight and dawn, thin as a whisper. Inside was a single sheet, no watermark, no heading. Just one line, typed in the same sterile font I'd seen on clearance notices. No busques más, Oseras el Cuarto. Beneath it, a number sequence I recognized instantly, a compartment code used for internal black ops. Not Soviet, ours. I sat there, staring at that paper like it might start bleeding. Every instinct screamed to burn it, and I did. Watched the flames chew through the warning until it curled into ash, but the smell stayed. It clung to my clothes, to my hands like guilt you can't wash off. From that moment, everything sharpened sounds, shadows, the rhythm of my own breath. Berlin felt smaller, its alleys tighter. Every reflection in a shop window looked like someone else's eyes. I started sleeping in bursts, gun on the nightstand, clothes folded for a quick exit. Retirement? That dream felt like a bad joke now, and yet part of me couldn't let go. I kept circling the same thought like a vulture over bones. Why erase 3 men who'd carried the weight of wars? What secret was so heavy it crushed its own guardians? The answer came later, though not from a file or a confession. It came in a voice I barely recognized, slurred by alcohol and fear, in a bar that smelled of smoke and old lies. But that night the envelope found me was when I learned the rule no one prints in the manuals. The game doesn't end when you stop playing. It ends when they decide you've seen enough. And I was getting close. Too close. It was raining again. The kind of Berlin rain that seeps into your bones and makes everything smell like rust. I woke to it tapping on the glass like fingers. At first, I thought that was what pulled me out of sleep until I saw the shape on the sill. A white envelope, no postage, no smudge from the rain. Someone had been careful, too careful. I opened it with hands that felt older than the night before. Inside, A single sheet of paper, edges crisp, like it came straight off a typewriter older. Then me. No greeting, no explanation. Just one line in perfect black ink. No busques más, o serás el cuarto. I stared at those words until they blurred, until they felt less like a warning and more like a verdict. Beneath them was a string of numbers. 9 digits arranged in a pattern I'd only seen in one place. Internal clearance codes reserved. For operations we weren't supposed to know existed. Not Soviet codes. Not East German. Ours. I sat there, envelope in one hand, the other gripping the edge of the desk hard enough to splinter wood. A lifetime of training told me what to do next. Earn it, move, go dark. But something heavier held me there, the knowledge that someone had crossed every layer of my security to leave this on my window. No lock, no deadbolt, no alarm stopped them. That wasn't a threat. That was a demonstration. I checked the perimeter anyway. Nothing. Streets empty except for puddles and the low hum of a distant tram. No eyes in the shadows. No cars idling with lights off. Whoever delivered that envelope didn't linger. They didn't need to. I burned the paper in the sink, watched the flame crawl over the letters like it wanted to taste each one. But the words stayed. I carried them into every breath that day, every step across that gray city dot. And then the real weight hit me. Not the threat, not even the code. It was the implication buried under those 9 digits. This wasn't a rogue op. This wasn't a faction freelancing in the dark. This was sanctioned, stamped, signed off by a hand that didn't tremble. I spent the next 48 hours playing out scenarios, like a man rehearsing his own obituary. Could I run? No. Where? Every safe house I knew was compromised. Could I report? To who? The only people left to trust were the ones writing my name into a warning dot, so I waited. Sat by the same window where the envelope appeared, watching the rain carve crooked lines down the glass. Part of me hoped for another note. Part of me prayed for silence. Neither came. What did come was worse. A name whispered in a place where whispers were currency. A bar in Charlottenburg, thick with smoke. And men who'd forgotten what daylight looked like. That's where I heard it, the first crack in the wall of secrets I'd been beating my fists against, and it came from someone I thought was dead. Friedrichstrasse at night had a rhythm of its own, trains groaning, boots echoing, the occasional arc of a street vendor stubborn enough to work both sides of the wall. I stood near the old station, collar up, hands in pockets, eyes on the tram lines like I was waiting for someone who'd never arrive. That was the cover story I told myself. The truth? I was waiting for a ghost. 2 nights earlier, in that bar thick with smoke and regret, a voice I'd known in another life whispered in my ear. A colonel I'd shared rations with in Saigon, now dressed like a man who couldn't shake the smell of failure. Drunk enough to drown, but sharp enough to cut, he leaned close and said, "If you still want answers, follow the man with the gray scarf at Friedrichstrasse. Midnight." So I waited, checked my watch at 23:58. Then I saw him tall, lean, the kind of posture that spoke of military before civilian life softened it. Gray scarf coiled tight around his neck, briefcase in hand. He moved like Berlin belonged to him. Shadowed him through the crowd, heaping 3 bodies between us. Every nerve screamed this was a trap, but curiosity had its claws in me. We cut through the station, down to the old platform where fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. Then, I saw the exchange. Clean, surgical. My gray-scarfed ghost met another man halfway down the platform, tweed coat, hat pulled low, the kind of anonymity you only buy with training. They didn't speak. Just a nod. Then the briefcase passed like a prayer nobody wanted to say out loud. And here's the part that hollowed me out. The man taking the case wasn't KGB. He was ours. North American accent, posture drilled by the same schools that broke me in. I knew it before he even turned his head. Counterintelligence. The colonel's words came back, slurred and sticky. They didn't run, kid. They were erased. I stayed, just long enough to see the handshake quick, almost invisible, and the paper packet slip into the tweed coat's pocket. Then the platform emptied like a tide pulling back, leaving me standing there with the cold truth pooling around my shoes. Generals hadn't defected. They'd been written out of history by the same hands feeding me assignments. And now, watching that exchange under the buzz of dying lights, I realized something uglier than treason. I was part of the cleanup, whether I wanted it or not. I walked out into the Berlin night, the city humming like nothing had happened. But in my head, every street lamp felt like an interrogation light, every shadow like a verdict waiting to be read. And that was the moment I stopped asking who the enemy was, because I already knew. The first whispers came from a man I trusted too much to doubt, a colonel with nicotine-stained fingers and a voice gone hoarse from too many lies. We met in a cafe near Tiergarten, the kind of place where conversations disappear under clinking cups. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Didn't have to. They weren't deserters, he muttered, stirring coffee that had gone cold. They were loud, too loud. I let him talk. Learned long ago that silence fills faster than questions. What he said next cracked something open inside me. The generals had threatened to go public, not with operational details, not with troop movements, but with something worse. A deal. A pact brokered at the highest levels, signed in rooms even, we couldn't access. Concessions to avoid nuclear escalation, traded like poker chips in a game where no one cared about the bodies behind the bets. Technology for silence. Influence for immunity. Lines drawn in ink that bled across continents. If they exposed it, the Cold War wouldn't have ended with speeches and champagne. It would have ended in fire, and Washington knew it. So they chose the cleaner war, the one fought in shadows, with files and favors instead of bombs. I wanted to call him a liar. Wanted to believe we were still the good guys in a world split down the middle. But then he slid something across the table. A photo, creased and grainy, stamped classified in a font that felt heavier than steel. It showed the generals, not in uniform, not in custody, in body bags. 3 black shapes zipped and tagged, lined up like discarded truths. Where'd you get this? I asked, but he was already walking away, leaving his untouched coffee and a question that burned hotter than the bitter steam rising from my cup. I stayed in that cafe long after the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, staring at that photo until my eyes blurred. Each crease felt like a scar carved into the lie I'd been living. And somewhere beneath the static in my head, a thought sharpened into something close to certainty. If the Pentagon was willing to erase 3 generals to protect a secret, then the real enemy wasn't hiding in Moscow. He was signing paychecks in Washington. I folded the photo into my coat pocket, stepped out into a city drowning in fog, and told myself the cold was the reason I couldn't stop shaking. But the truth? It wasn't the cold dot, it was knowing. I'd seen too much to survive what came next. Charlottenburg was quieter than usual that night. Bars half empty, rain tracing patterns on the neon signs like fingerprints. I picked a corner table, back to the wall, and waited for the man who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He arrived late, weaving through the haze like a ghost that hadn't decided if it wanted to haunt me. Same colonel, same tired eyes, only now they were drowning in whiskey. He dropped into the chair across from me without a word. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper, so thin I almost missed it under the hum of an old jukebox. They didn't go east, he said, fingers tightening on the glass. They didn't run at all. I didn't move. Just let the silence drag it out of him. inch by inch, like wire pulling skin. They boarded planes, he went on, voice cracking in the middle. But not to Moscow, not even close. The orders didn't send them behind the wall. They sent them over water. His hand shook so bad, I thought the glass might shatter. He drained it anyway, then stared at me like a man already standing in his own grave. That's all you get. You didn't hear it from me. I pressed him. Useless. He'd said what he came to say, and saying it had cost him something he couldn't afford. When he stood, his legs wobbled like dead weight. He walked out into the rain without a coat, without looking back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the condensation bleeding down my glass. Planes. Over water. My mind ran wild North Sea, Atlantic, some godforsaken strip of concrete in the middle of nowhere. And why the sea if the plan was silence? That's when the pattern clicked like a round chambering in steel. Water meant no bodies, no witnesses. Just weight dragged under until lungs gave out and names dissolved like ink. I left the bar feeling heavier than when I walked in. The street smelled of wet stone and old secrets. A tram screeched somewhere in the dark, sparks spitting off the rails like warning flares. I kept my collar high and my pace slow, every shadow stretching too far, every sound feeling like it carried teeth. The curl had given me a breadcrumb, maybe his last, and all it did was lead me deeper into a truth no one wanted told. I should have gone home, burned the memory like I burned that note. Instead, I kept walking through the rain, chasing ghosts I couldn't bury, because something in me still needed to know what those generals saw before the dark closed over them. And the worst part? I think I already knew. The answer didn't come from a file. It came from a face. I was cutting through a side street near Kurfürstendamm, rain dripping off my hat, when I saw him leaning against a wall under a dead streetlight, smoking like it was keeping him alive. His name punched through my memory before I wanted it to. Mason. We'd shared a safe house in Prague, traded secrets and whispers only men who trusted too much ever shared. Back then, he was just another tired spook with bad knees and worse jokes. Now, he was wearing the look I'd only seen on men with clearance above daylight. Clean coat, eyes that didn't blink when they should. And on his wrist, a watch you didn't get from Sears, you got it from rooms where silence costs blood. He smiled when he saw me. Too slow, too careful. You shouldn't be out here, he said, voice flat as a closed file. I asked the question anyway. Was it you? He flicked his cigarette into the gutter, the ember hissing like a secret dying. Don't do this, he said, stepping closer. The smell of tobacco clung to him like guilt. 3 generals, I said. You put them in the ground? His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm, almost bored. They didn't want to play by the rules. You know what happens when the rules break? That was it. No denial, no excuse. Just the quiet confirmation of a man who's done his job too many times to remember the names. My hand brushed the inside of my coat, fingers curling around steel I promised myself I'd never use on someone who spoke my language. Then I stopped, because pulling that trigger wouldn't bring anyone back, and it wouldn't erase the fact that somewhere along the line, I'd been working for the same machine that fed Mason his orders. You're in over your head. He sighed, eyes like frost. Walk away. You've got time to die of something normal. Then he was gone. No footsteps. No door creak. Just gone, like he'd stepped into the cracks of Berlin and let the city swallow him. I stood there, breathing smoke that wasn't mine, tasting the truth like iron in my mouth. The kill team wasn't KGB. It wasn't Rogue. It was us. And the man who told me to trust no one? I'd just seen him disappear into the rain with blood on his hands and maybe mine on his list. Thought knowing the truth would set something free inside me. Instead, it locked every door I had left. And that's when I understood the only way out was to stop running and start remembering. Because the last piece of this puzzle was still out there, echoing in a room I couldn't forget. Years later, I still hear that room. The hum of fluorescent lights, the slow drip from a rusted pipe, the shuffle of boots on concrete like distant thunder. 3 generals sitting shoulder to shoulder, planning a future that would never exist. They thought they were buying time. For the country, maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. I replay it more than I should, the way one of them tapped his pen against the table, steady, like a heartbeat that didn't know it was counting down. The way their voices stayed calm while the walls swallowed every word. And the way I stood there, believing I was part of something righteous, too blind to see the shadow stretching over all of us. I've read the history books they talk about diplomacy, treaties, walls falling like dominoes in the glow of flashbulbs. They don't talk about basements. They don't talk about bodies zipped in black, or names scrubbed from rosters by hands that shook the president's hand an hour later. Sometimes, I wonder if those men understood what was coming when they walked into that room. Sometimes I wonder if I did. I sit now in a kitchen that smells of old coffee, staring at a window black with night. Outside, the world feels quieter than it used to, but I know better. The silence just learned how to speak in softer tones. If you asked me who I served, I couldn't tell you anymore. A flag? An idea? Or a lie so big it made every oath feel like theater? What I do know is this: secrets don't rot in files. They rot in people. And I've carried this one long enough, Dot. So, if you're listening, remember this truth doesn't set you free. It just changes the shape of the cage, Dot, and tonight, mine feels smaller than ever. Before this story fades, like the manic buried, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more of what never made it into the archives. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where these ghosts travel.